Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Good morning. On behalf of Medulla Coats, Chair of Medical Humanities, FRHistS Medical College, I extend a warm welcome to you all for today's lectures. These lectures are a part of lecture series on medical humanities and ethics in medicine for curious minds. These are in collaboration with King's College London, organized by Tata Memorial Centre, and the previous lectures were hosted by JJ Group of Hospitals, Grant Medical College, and these two are here in our institute today. To deliver the lectures, we have among us Dr. Ruth Richardson, medical historian, scholar and broadcaster at the Center of Life Writing Research at King's College. We also have Director of Tata Memorial Centre, Dr. Belgravia. And we also have Dr. Brian-Howitz, who is Professor of Medicine and Art. We are very happy to have you here, sir. I request Dr. Kulkarni to welcome our guests with floral bouquets. Dr. now request Dr. Bombay to introduce today's event to us.
Is this slide you have?
Yes.
So the purpose of starting these lecture series, Medical Humanities, is twofold. One is that there is definitely a breakdown in the communication that we have between patient and doctors. So there's something amiss and we need to understand what is it that's amiss, and I'm sure Medical Humanities could contribute to this loss of communication between the two important entities. And the second bit is we have gone into a reductionist model, into reducing the kind of things that we want to work on, and that reductionism is in fact an expression of human frailty. I am unable to absorb the whole that is in front of me, so I reduce it within my understanding domain so that I can look at only that. So that vertical downwards has made us lose the horizontal spread, and that itself is something that is important, and we can get some insights into it through Medical Humanities. And the third component is, as far as patient care is concerned, this kind of reductionism has given us fantastically good results. So the outcomes, cure rate, survival, as far as cancer is concerned, and getting the ailment under control for majority of the non-communicable diseases, all these have improved outcome when somebody is focused, dealing only with one disease. So that reductionist approach is definitely has worked, and we need to have some kind of consonance between this reductionism as well as not forgetting what the whole is. And that's where this picture, the Escher lithogram, works extremely well, and you will find that if you start from here, you are actually going down the steps, you keep on going down, and you are definitely keep going down further, you're still going down and you're reaching again the same spot. You've reached the same spot, although you have descended multiple areas, at least 4 areas where you've descended further down, and yet the whole picture is in perfect harmony. So that's what we need to understand, that you can go vertically down, yet not to lose what the horizontal spread is, and that's what Humanities is going to give us. And all this happens by virtue of understanding what has happened in the history. So unless we read, understand what history is, we are definitely condemned to repeat it. So here is a historian who is going to give us some insights into human anatomy, the Henry Gray's anatomy, as well as what contribution Henry Van Dyke Carter has given to the anatomy as well as to various other infectious diseases prevalent in those days in Mumbai. And let's get some insights into that. Thank you.
I would like to now take you through the glimpses of growth and journey of Division of Medical Humanities, and Dr. Pandya will speak to you 2 words on Medical Humanities, and he will also introduce formally Dr. Ruth Richardson.
It is a remarkable thing that you have done. Set up that. The concept of humanity. First of all, it's humanity. It is really a very important aspect which has been missed out in not only this city and our country. My proposition today is that the awareness and particularly an acquaintance, if not a deep study of the humanities, makes a better position. And what exactly do we mean by humanities? Well, it includes history, it includes ethics, it includes literature, poetry, philosophy, religion, perhaps social sciences, art and culture, the visual arts, poetry, drama, and even cinema.
You had a brief glimpse into what this institution has been doing. This is an institution, incidentally, which has generated many scalawags, and we have quite a few of them sitting in front of us. And I think it's very appropriate that we should be having these talks here today, thanks to Dr. M.V.L.Kothari and his team. Particularly so because these talks are being delivered by a young lady who has done a tremendous amount of work in a variety of fields related to the humanities. And it's especially apt that it should be under the joint auspices of the Humanities division of this institution, because in the year 2000, or 18 years ago, Dr. Richardson was a participant at a meeting which was held by the Royal College of Arts in London. And that meeting was aimed exactly at what Dr. M.V.L.Kothari was recommending now, to foster humanities in the medical profession in London and in Britain generally. And she delivered a talk over there. And at the end of the meeting, she and her co-editor edited a book which was published under the title Medical Humanities, a Practical Introduction. So I think this is a fitting venue and a fitting individual for us to address us today. It's very difficult to get biographical notes on her. She's kept herself very private, but I was able to ferret out a couple of facts, and I'm going to quote her. She says, because we need to know about her, she's an important person, we need to learn about her. And she says, I am a Londoner, born and bred from generations of Londoners. So we have at least one fixed point, London, England. And then she says, I am an interdisciplinary historian, which is very valid and which is very true, because the books that she has published include, first of all, the book I already told you about on medical humanities, and then there is Death, Dissection and the Destitute, which was published by the Chicago University Press in 2000. Then the book which she talked about yesterday evening at Tucker Memorial, Vintage Papers from the Lancet. Then the book about which she's going to talk to us today, The Making of Mr. Gray's Anatomy. I think these are important, but the last book is interesting in a completely different way, because it talks of Dickens and the workhouse. And I don't know how many of you are aware that she is at present, or for some time now, in conducting a movement to try and preserve what remains of the Dickens workhouse, if I'm not mistaken, is that right? And I do hope that she will succeed, because this is a historic landmark in London. Now, I would recommend to the younger members of the audience to use the magical tool of the internet and look for material by her which is available to us. And if you look out for her papers, you will find a very interesting paper called Chap Books, C-H-A-P, Chap Books. And she has defined them as small, affordable forms of literature for children and adults that were sold on the streets of London years and years and years ago. She also has available to us freely on the internet a paper on foundlings, orphans and unmarried mothers. Very interesting, Frankenstein, graveyards, scientific experiments and body snatchers, which of course is related in part to anatomy, and then Oliver Twist and the workhouse. So there is already a wealth of information available on the internet, products of her research and of her studies, which are of great interest and benefit to us. Look them up. And now, Dr. Richardson.
First of all, please may I say thank you all for being here. I'm so touched that you've all attended to listen to me. I'm very honoured that you should all be here. And I want to thank Professor Belgravia and Nishu and the staff in their institution for organising this event. And Professor Pandya, I feel most humble that you should say anything good about me at all, because I value your work more than I value my own. I just think your work here, and also on the new book, especially on the grant on Moorhead, is going to, I know, I haven't seen it yet, but I know it'll be tip-top. And your wife too, the work you both have done is so wonderful in Bombay, and medical history of Bombay. It's so important. And I don't think anything I've got to say today will teach you anything. Nothing at all, nothing at all. But for the rest, I'll speak first about the history of Gray's Anatomy, the famous anatomy textbook. And after that, I give another lecture on Carter, who was the man who did the illustrations in Gray's Anatomy and who came to Mumbai and in the 19th century and worked here for 30 years. And I know some people are against the Britisher history being part of Indian history, but it is part of Indian history. And Carter gave 30 years of his life here on Indian diseases in Mumbai. He loved India, he loved India. And actually, this is my first visit and I love it too, especially Mumbai. Especially Mumbai. Okay, so we start. Gray's Anatomy, it's probably the most famous textbook of anatomy in the world, apart from Vesalius, but this is for students, this was written for students, whereas Vesalius, I think, was for doctors who could afford expensive books. This is much cheaper, it was only 28 shillings, which is not, it was expensive, but not a fortune. And your mum and dad could buy it for you, okay? Now, please remember the title and the shape of the title page, because this is important later on. It's called Anatomy, Descriptive and Surgical. That's the real title. By Henry Gray, FRHistS, which is Fellow of the Royal Society. Lecturer on Anatomy at St George's College, St George's Medical School. Is that right? St George's Medical School. St George's Hospital. It was the medical school attached to the hospital of St George's. And underneath it says the drawings by H.B. Carter, M.D. So you can see he's not an FRHistS, but he's got a medical doctorate. He hasn't got his other qualifications there. Late demonstrator of anatomy at St George's Hospital. Yeah. Underneath it says the dissections jointly by the author and Dr. Carter, and then there's the publisher's logo, and underneath that the name of the publisher, John W. Parker and Son of West Strand, which is, I'll show you a photo in a bit, 1858. Okay, so that's the real original title page of the first edition. So remember the layout and the title and everything, because it changes later on. I've got something to show you later on. This is the original binding, and this took me a long time to find, because most editions of the first edition, most copies of the first edition, have been heavily used and have been rebound, and often in very expensive leather, because people value this book, and they particularly value the first edition because it's such a special book and such a famous book. Okay, now this was being used for teaching in what was then Bombay. It was being used for teaching in Bombay probably before it was being used in any British medical school, because it arrived here. Carter came from London in 1858, early 1858. He arrived in, I think, March. I've got the dates later on. And he was using it for teaching in Grant College in the anatomy school, the anatomy room at Grant College, probably before it was acquired in medical schools in England. And he writes in his diary that he's so pleased because it's becoming a favourite book with the students, and that the diagrams that he created, he says with no vanity, and it's true, he's not a vain man, that he's pleased to see that they help learn. And you'll see why when I show you what the previous books were like. Okay, so this was being used in India before it was really being used for teaching in England. The artist of these world-famous illustrations I've mentioned he came here when it was still being printed and bound, the first edition. So here we are, I've got the date, March 58, and appointed professor in May. Okay, and it arrived, I think, September, October time for him to start the new term. Carter sent his copy, he was sent his copy from the first batch off the press in London before it went into the shops. So it got here in October, and he says the book is out and looks well. So he was obviously pleased with it. And he used it in teaching and was delighted. And he was also really pleased because the dean of his school was proud to have him on the staff because of this book. He recognised how good his work was. So he was very happy about that too. So now this talk tells the story behind the book, and the second part, the second lecture, tells the story of his life in Bombay. Gray's Anatomy was created out of this hospital, St George's. It's on the corner of Hyde Park Corner, which is kind of in the middle of London. Okay, it was a big, important teaching hospital. It's now become a very posh hotel, which they won't let me through the front door. I tried to go in to see what it looked like, and the commissionaire could see that I didn't belong there. So that's it, I couldn't get in. I wanted to see the wards upstairs, but obviously they've been turned into very expensive hotel rooms for very rich people. So I haven't seen it. And that shows you in my photograph, how it looks now. The whole hospital has moved out to a much bigger site further out, where the population has moved to as well. There's not many people living in this area of London. It's Belgravia. It's full of embassies and super rich people's homes, and they're often not even there. So the houses are largely empty in Belgravia, just owned by very rich people. Now this is the medical school, which is on a different street. They couldn't expand on the site to build a medical school because the hospital occupied the site. So they acquired a site in the 1830s nearby, but in a little mews. And mewses in London were often behind the big houses, and it's where the carriages and horses and the families that drove the carriages and fed the horses and so on, lived. So these were smaller houses in smaller streets hidden behind the big streets. And this is a purpose-built medical school on one of these little back streets. Now the whole area is full of Porsches and Lamborghinis, and these are these little old coachmen's houses have been turned into little small mansions, and there's no working class people live there anymore. But the medical school building is still there, and it was turned into artist studios some time ago, I think about 20 or 30 years. And now the artist studios have become expensive flats, so it's difficult to get in. But I did happen to meet a man who lives inside. I waited around outside for a bit till I could grab somebody, and he showed me the inside. And you can still feel the medical school feel inside. It's got concrete stairs going up to the upper floors. Sadly, the dissecting room has been divided into two different flats. It's so tall, it's been divided into two. So you can't see much in there anyway. But you do get a feeling in the front hall that this was an institution. So there are remnants of it. Here are the two creators of this book. It's known as Gray's Anatomy, but Gray wrote the words and Carter did the illustrations, and they both jointly did the dissections. And actually, for about a third of the time the book was being done, maybe half, Gray was not present at St George's. He worked as a medical doctor for the richest aristocrat in the UK, the Duke of Sutherland, on his yacht, going around the coasts of England somewhere. I don't know where they went. But he wasn't present at St George's for quite a proportion of the time the book was being made, and he handed the work over to a subordinate. So I think it shouldn't really be Gray's Anatomy, it should be Gray's and Carter's, and whoever the third person was, a man called Holmes, who has a later history. This is a map showing whereabouts in London these things are, and if you follow that road that goes at the top part of the building, the top side is Hyde Park. Over here, I'll just try and point, see if I can make this work. It's this, the big building in the middle here, that great big building. This building here, that's Buckingham Palace, okay, and the gardens surrounding it. Hyde Park Corner is in between Hyde Park and the Palace Gardens. Okay, so that's number one, is where the hospital is. Number two is Kinnerton Street, the back street where the medical school is. Number three is Belgravia. Oh, thank you, thank you. That's better. Stick. And the name oh, that's right. Thank you. Okay, thank you. If you didn't hear, perhaps, this is the hospital, this is the medical school, this is Belgravia, this whole area. You can see it's very widespread houses and lots of gardens and space. This is where Gray lived, okay? Down here is where Carter lived, which is near the canal. This is an industrial area associated with the canal. This is now Victoria Station, this canal run. The railway came through the canal and it occupied the basin. So this is a more industrial area. And he lived in a bedsit in lodgings here. Okay. Gray's family owned their house in Belgravia because his father had worked for the king. So you can see, I've given all the keys, but this arrow here is just the end of the Great Exhibition of 1851. I don't know if you know about this, the gigantic first Great World Exhibition of all nations that was put up in a glass building in Hyde Park in 1851. It was called the Crystal Palace, and it was there for 1 year only. This is the Crystal Palace, a view of all the crowds attending. And I think it's a very significant building and an event, as a significant event. I mean, it was a hugely significant event at the time, but I think it's also the case for the book. The whole decade was influenced by this building, and it was an innovative building. It was designed by a gardener, a man called Joseph Paxton, who was a gardener for an aristocrat. They had all kinds of designs for this exhibition building, and they couldn't decide, no one could decide how they could make a movable building in Hyde Park that could be dismantled and used again. And he said a glass house could do it, and he designed the glass house. And you can see it's a very unusual structure. You can see the structure of the building, all those columns. It influences architecture for the rest of the 19th century. It's a very important building from that point of view. So it shows its own structure. It's made of glass so that it's flooded with light. And it was open to inspection. It had the world's produce and the world's finest mechanisms and artworks brought to it. All the arts and crafts of the world came. Every country in the world had exhibits in the Great Exhibition. And there were days when the tickets cost a guinea, a pound or a guinea, I think a pound, an English pound sterling. And then there were other days when it only cost a shilling, which is a 20th of a pound. It's a small coin. That was still money to find for somebody who was working class, but they could do it. They could do it. They could, if you had a job, you could save a shilling. And if you were lucky, you could save enough to take your family. And here is a cartoon from Punch, the caricature magazine, called The Pound and the Shilling. Whoever thought of meeting you here? And on the far side, they're rich people, and the man whose profile is being shown, I think, is meant to be the Duke of Wellington. Okay, and the little children in the foreground, there's a rich girl and a poor boy meeting each other, and you can see the poorer parents, the poorer fathers on your left, wearing the paper hats, which were the signs of working class people. They used to make paper hats to wear at work. And it says, whoever should have thought of meeting you here. You know, it's a kind of mixing of castes within British culture. It's a very interesting phenomenon. And just before that, there had been quite a difficult decade. 1848, there were revolutions right the way across Europe. Lots of countries lost their governments in these revolutions. In England, we had something called Chartism, which was a political movement for increased rights for poorer people. And yet it hadn't become a revolution because they were more law-abiding than elsewhere in Europe. And this exhibition seemed to embody that, this way that they suddenly, the upper classes suddenly recognised that the working classes were hungry for education. They didn't want a revolution, they just wanted an improved life. Okay, and this is a caricature of the whole of the world coming to visit the Great Exhibition. This is by George Cruikshank, who also illustrated some of Dickens. He did actually illustrate Oliver Twist. And you can see the world is like a great pustule, and all these insect-looking human beings racing to the Great Exhibition. And this one is Piccadilly Circus at the time of the Great Exhibition. So you can see London was absolutely teeming, even busier than Mumbai. At the time of the exhibition. Okay. Now, just to remind you roughly, that the Serpentine River comes down through Hyde Park, down to Knightsbridge. The Knightsbridge was a bridge actually over the river, the Serpentine River. And the Great Exhibition in pink there occupied the land between the Serpentine and Knightsbridge. Okay. And the medical school is pointed out at the bottom corner. So you can see how close they were. They were within easy walking distance. It would have taken, I would say, 5 minutes or less to get across to the Great Exhibition. And I'm certain they both went. They must have gone several times, I would think, because it was really something to see. Now these two men, Henry Gray and Carter, they're quite different people. As we say in England, chalk and cheese. I don't know what you would say here, but chalk and cheese. Okay, Gray, they were both ambitious, but in different ways, quite different ways. Gray was on the surgical track, and he had patronage. He had the patronage of Brodie, Sir Benjamin Brodie, who ended up President of the Royal College of Surgeons and President of the General Medical Council in England. So he was a big fish, and he was Gray's mentor. He was older than Carter. He was 28, whereas Carter was 24. His father was associated, I mentioned, with the Royal Court. He was a resident of Belgravia. He was an Anglican, which is Church of England. He was an establishment figure. He was born and bred in London, in Belgravia, not like me, somewhere else. He'd been apprenticed to Benjamin Brodie, and he had been a hospital governor. Now, you don't become a hospital governor at this time in London unless you have quite a lot of money. You have to make a big donation to the hospital in order to become a governor. I can't remember how much the amount is, but it's a large amount. And he was on a fast track. He was on a fast track upwards. Carter was quite different. He trained as an apothecary, which is now we would call a pharmacist, which is the old way to become a general practitioner. You qualify first in pharmacy and then in surgery, and you were called a general practitioner. So he started as an apothecary, and really, by nature, he's a researcher. He's much younger. His father was an artist, which is not a high status profession, but he's a fine artist. He painted wonderful sea pictures and boats, shipping, very beautiful paintings. He was a lodger, as I said. He was a religious Christian, but not Anglican. He was a nonconformist. So his mother was an evangelical congregationalist, which is a kind of nonconformist Christianity which has no priests, it has a congregation who have their own democratic structure. He was an outsider. He wasn't born in London. He was a provincial. He was independent and he was introverted. He was a microscopist. He was a shy microscopist. That's the sweetest thing. He earned his way through medical school through working, through drawing, and through earning scholarships. He competed for everything that was there because he didn't want his parents to have to bear the weight of the cost of his training. And he got quite a few. I'll show you the book. And he believed in meritocracy. He didn't believe in having someone pull strings for you. He believed you should do it on your own merit, and your merit should be recognised, and that's often not the case. And he got his MD himself. So, and the most important thing about the relationship between these two and the book is that Gray was the employer and Carter was the employee. So there's quite a difference in status between these two men. Gray died of confluent smallpox in 1861, and he was only 34 years of age, so it's only a little while after the first edition. Actually, he manages to see the second edition through publication, but then he gets smallpox and dies. And sadly, none of his personal papers seem to survive. I don't think he had a diary, but I don't know for sure. Everything went. I think they burnt everything because they were so frightened of this germ spreading. They didn't know about germs, but they knew this thing was contagious. It was very, very dangerous. He'd been inoculated as a child, but it didn't protect him, sadly. He got it nursing his little nephew. He protected other people in the family by nursing the nephew himself. But then he took the disease and died of it. Had he survived, I think he would have become president of the Royal College eventually. He would have done very, very well, because he was a very clever man, and he knew how the structures of power worked, and he had help. So he would have made his way up, no doubt. But he died so young. And I fear that quite a lot of Carter's drawings also disappeared at this time, because he purchased quite a lot of Carter's work. He used Carter's work quite a lot. So originals disappeared. And here's his grave, which is in Highgate Cemetery. I'm very glad a gentleman in the cemetery heard me speak. I gave a lecture at the cemetery about Gray, and he found the funding, I don't know how, but he reset the stone and cleared the whole area so that people can visit Gray's grave. And you can see his mother died shortly afterwards. She was a widow already, and it must have been terrible for her to lose her only son. Absolutely catastrophic. Poor woman. But there is a specimen surviving from Gray's actual dissections. This is a cuttlefish. He did a prize-winning essay on the nerves of the eye in 1846, and this specimen survives to this day in the Royal College of Surgeons in London. And that's amazing, because the Royal College of Surgeons Museum took a direct hit with a bomb in the Second World War in the Blitz. So we're very lucky that this glass bottle with its contents survives today. You're very fortunate here that you have these wonderful museums of pathological specimens that haven't had direct hits. I'm so grateful to see you've got pathology museums and anatomy museums which survived from the 19th century. This is Carter's entry in the book, in the Academic Achievements book, and you can see the number of certificates. Certificate here, that prize here, scholarship, certificate, prize, certificate, senior scholar. This is his career at medical school. And you can see, A, he's clever, and B, he works very hard. He's not a genius, I don't think. I mean, you know, he's like most people, work is the main effort. And then he got a 2-year studentship at the Royal College of Surgeons in London, which was a very coveted thing. It was tremendously competitive, and he won the competition for it. To be an assistant to Richard Owen, who ended up as the first director of the Natural History Museum in London. And the other person in charge was a man called John Queckett, who wrote the first it's the first major textbook on microscopy in English, published in England. So under both these men, he learned a tremendous amount, not just microscopy and anatomy and comparative anatomy, but also how to be a professional museum curator and anatomist, comparative anatomist himself. Incredibly hard work. The person wearing the gown, I don't think is Carter, but that's the kind of job he had. He had to show visitors round. His job was to relieve the two important men of any kind of lowly work. So he was having to show people around, preserve specimens, dissect, make museum things, make posters and all that kind of thing. He was having to do all the service work. So these two men were relieved of their administrative work within the library, within the museum. This is the basement. One of the basement rooms in the old Royal College was specially devoted to teaching microscopy, and they had special benches where the microscopes went round on a track, so the students could all look at the focused specimen. And you see on the wall here, on this side, posters. I think some of those might be by Carter. I can't prove it, but I know he was making posters for display at the time Queckett was doing this book. So I know that it's likely that some of those posters are his. And this is a photograph, a surviving photograph of what the interior of the museum was like in the times of photography. You can see it's an incredibly congested place, full of data, full of information. And at the time, there were lots and lots of animals in there, animal remains in there, because they were calling, they put a call out around the world to English doctors who had travelled around the world, British doctors, please to send special specimens, interesting specimens into the college, because they were trying to work out the evolution before evolution had been described. They were trying to understand the vertebrate relationships. And they couldn't do that without these specimens from around the world. So he's dissecting all kinds of things. This is part of his scholarship diary. Dissecting, this is November 53, dissecting larynx of walrus with Mr. Queckett. November 53, engaged entire day with Mr. Queckett, mounting preparations, microscopic preparations. May 54, dissecting daily, mounting specimens, drawing, determining specific gravity measures of animal rib, ear bones, ivory, elephant, boa, rhino, hyena, ostrich, penguin, lion, hawk, frog, carp, that's a fish, assiduous labours. Assiduous labours. 54, May. Mr. Queckett's histological lectures are now ended, doubtless to the regret of many, and among those myself. He absolutely loved Queckett's work. He admired Queckett, and they got on very well together. But you can see the variety of stuff. Some of that stuff came from the Zoological Society at Regent's Park, where the zoo now stands. They were gifts. Animals that died there came to the Royal College for autopsy. Okay, but some of these things were sent from abroad already preserved, or semi-preserved. Then after the Royal College, he goes to Paris for a little while, which is a thing most doctors tried to do if they could possibly do it. They tried to find money to go to Paris, because they recognise that it's important to see another country, to see how it's done elsewhere, how things are done elsewhere. and also because in Paris there were more bodies available, and teaching was different from in London. It was important to see. And he was very clever. He purchased play scripts and went to see plays in Paris to listen for the accent and to learn the words, to learn his French, to improve his French. He sat in the theatres in the evenings. And that's a very interesting thing because his religion might be against theatre, but he did it for learning, so it might not have been such a guilt thing for him. But he came back with a whole series of dissecting drawings from his work dissecting in Paris. And I think a whole series of these were what Gray saw when Carter came back and actually liked the look of very much. He studied the vascular system. And I think this drawing, which is from Gray's, is actually based on one of the drawings from Paris. I'm not certain about this and I can't prove it. I haven't got the originals or anything, but you'll see why in a minute. This is the Strand in the 19th century. It's a photograph, so it's round about 50s and 60s, 1850s and 60s. And I'm showing this because this is where the publishers work, this long building in the foreground. It's called the Pepperbox Building, it's still there, and it's called that because there's little round turrets at the end of the building on each side, which look like a salt pot and a pepper pot. So it's a kind of affectionate name for it. And if you go there today, it's opposite Charing Cross Station if you go to London. And so you come out of the station, you face this building, and if you see a Starbucks, that is the building where the publishers used to work. Okay, John William Parker and Son. And this is how they look. They're very interesting men. The older father is nearer to me, and the younger on the far side. The father had been a printer, very experienced printer, who had become a publisher, and the son had been educated at King's College London, and is a very learned, you can see he's a very learned young man. So the only previous book they published with Gray had been an essay that he had won a big prize for, called the Essay on the Spleen, with unacknowledged images by Carter in it. But sadly, the spleen is not such a popular organ, and so nobody bought the book. So they ended up with a lot of books in the basement, and naturally they wanted something slightly more saleable. So I think the idea could have come from them. They had published a book for lay readers called The House I Live In, viewing the body as your tenement, your earthly tenement, in a Christian manner. And the quote is from the Bible, "I am fearfully and wonderfully made." And of course, Carter was a Christian and viewed the body as the image of God. So this book is kind of after his ideas, but it's a general book. This wasn't by Carter, it was by someone else, a man called Gertin, who was a schoolmaster. But you can see this edition is the 10th edition. This was a bestseller. It went on and on and on selling, because it gave the whole history. It gave you the skeleton, the muscles, everything inside, but in very small. It's a very small book, tiny thing, and cheaply sold for general readers. Carter says in his diary in late 1855, little to record, Gray made proposal to assist by drawings in bringing out a manual for students. A good idea, but did not come to any plan. Too exacting, for would not be simple artist. Now you can hear what he's doubtful. He knows that it's not just doing pretty pictures. It's not just doing a picture or two. This is a major piece of work. And he's leery about it, meaning he's nervous of it, because he knows he's done other stuff for Gray, and Gray hasn't given him any credit. Okay? And he can see he's not just going to be employed for the odd picture. This is a major, major piece of work. So he's careful about getting involved. This is after he's done the work at the Royal College, and he's looking for other work, so he's in a difficult position economically. Gray pushes hard. He feels his power. So you can feel that there's pressure being put on him to take up this job. And Gray knows that Carter's broke. And you can see the difference, when you know this about them, you can see the difference in personality more clearly. the pressuring and the pressured. Renewed conversation with Gray as to the proposed manual of anatomy, which I am to illustrate. So he's come to there, this is early 56, he's come round to doing it, he's agreed he's going to get involved. Gray, shrewd, meaning he's a businessman, but considerate. The proposal seems providential. Now when he says the word providential, that means it's come from above, somehow. And I think he recognised that somehow this was going to help him. A, as a project to do, but B, the funds would help him get his MD. He could support himself doing this work and do his MD, and that was terribly important to him. He knew, being a poorer doctor, you had to be well qualified in order to get anywhere. So the MD would make a huge difference, and he knew he could do an MD. He knew he was intelligent enough to do it and hard-working enough. So he really wanted to achieve an MD. So this was providential, it came from above. Somehow or another it came from above via Gray. Thursday, call on Gray. This is January 56, the very last day of January. Call on Gray in the evening. Selected first illustrations for the work. Gray at work and employing others. He's a good example for this. Now, Carter was a person who couldn't delegate easily. He did the work himself. Whereas he actually admired Gray at this stage for being able to delegate and use other people's work to make something bigger. Gray is very good at delegating. This is the anatomy room at Kinnerton Street. And you can see now, I told you it was divided into two now. You can see how it could be because it's such a tall, wonderful room. And it's got the same shaped roof as the Great Exhibition. And again, it's flooded with light, like the Great Exhibition. I think there are architectural parallels between the two. There's only one body visible in the room, one corpse, and that's the feet of it's the end of term this photograph was taken. The end of the anatomy season, and the man in black sitting behind it is Henry Gray. This was taken in 1861, just before Gray died, a few months, I think, before Gray died. And Carter isn't in the room because he's already in Mumbai. He's already teaching here. But you can get the feeling of the room and the images on the walls that they were using to teach from and so on, and the light. And actually, in the original, it's quite a large photograph, an old-fashioned glass plate photograph. And you can actually see the time on the clock. The detail is very good in the original. I'm sorry it's not reproduced quite so well. And these are the faces of the people who were dissected in that room, who are paupers who died without enough money for their own funerals. Some of them are duplicates. You get a feeling they used one body for more than one thing. But their faces, you'll see, are quite dignified. They're not like some of the earlier anatomical books where they're shown in, squashed and like meat. They're not shown like that. They're shown in a more dignified way in Gray's. And these people are taken from workhouses where the poor died, and hospitals where they died without enough money for a funeral, or prisons. These were the lowest of the low in British society, but they're not shown that way in the book. This is an image by Pugin, the architect, who did not like the system under which bodies were taken, but he shows it. It's called The Poor Man's Convoy, and on the wall it says, a variety of subjects always ready for medical students. And you can see the production line at work, the men carrying the corpses away for dissection. Prior to the Anatomy Act in 1832 in England, the only legal source for bodies had been hanged murderers. And Parliament transferred that terrible punishment of dismemberment from murder to poverty, just with one act of Parliament, a piece of paper, one enactment. And it was terribly unpopular, terribly, terribly unpopular. And it's why the insurance companies became so big in the 19th century, because people paid a penny a week not to be dissected, to have enough money for a funeral. It was bitterly, bitterly unpopular. Okay, so now this book was ready for the opening of the school year in October 58 in London. Single volume, priced 28 shillings, and which was cheaper than the main competitor, which was called Quain's Anatomy, which came in 3 smaller volumes, a little pile of 3, and cost 31 shillings. So it undercut the main competitor. And the British Medical Journal reviewed it and said the method of introducing woodcuts in which every anatomical region is accurately labelled on the woodcut itself is nothing more than a simple transference of the diagrams of the anatomical theatre to the pages of the book. So basically they're saying you see the chalk drawings on the blackboard and that's transferred onto the page. It makes it sound very simple. Okay, there were some fantastic artists, medical men who were teaching anatomy who were also brilliant artists. I've heard of one in Bombay who was ambidextrous. I can't remember his name, but he could draw with both hands at once. And my husband Brian has seen, he's actually been taught by people using chalks, coloured chalks on the blackboard. And it seems to me from the blackboard welcome that the blackboards were still used until quite recently here. I hope there are still doctors who can do that. In London, it's been a long time since that's a possibility. I've never witnessed it myself. But imagine, you do these amazing drawings on the board and then they're wiped off for the next lesson. That would break your heart. It would break your heart, and no photography to do it. So I think this idea, it's a good one, that's where these things derive from. But this reviewer had no idea the difficulty of creating this book, actually. He makes it sound so easy, but he got no idea of the enormous amount of work involved, all of its pitfalls. He was unaware that the printer was going through bankruptcy proceedings while this book was being printed, and of a near fiasco during the whole process of the creation of the book, which was not known until I did my research. In March '57, I found a reference in Carter's diary. He says, constantly engaged daily in a solitary, quiet, mechanical occupation, drawing on wood. Now that shows that Carter's original drawings weren't done on paper, they were done on the wood block, directly on the wood block. This is how printing was done. There was no photography in printing in those days. So it was done same size, ready to print. He drew on the block. Normally what would happen is he would have a drawing, the drawing would be transferred in reverse onto the block would be carved away, so the black lines are the bits that are left, all the white stuff is taken out. And then the ink is rolled over it and you print from it, okay? That's how it's normally done. He was drawing direct on the block in reverse. Because he was an artist, and he could see that if another artist got in the way, it would diminish the value of the images. So he was drawing directly in reverse on the blocks. And the blocks went directly to the engravers, really good engravers. But then in November, you see this little entry, and nobody had explained or researched this before. Parker's business, really serious. Parker's the publisher, really serious. Cuts too large for the book. So the wood cuts were too big. The blocks were too big. But his neglect is as great as my ignorance, at least. Gray will clear himself. The error might have been remedied had I acted up to conviction at the beginning. So you get from that little entry that he realised early on there was something amiss, that these things looked a bit big. But Gray didn't bother with that and told him to get on with it. So he did get on with it. He was obedient. He did what he was told. And it turned out to be wrong. It turned out to be wrong. Gray, I think, purchased the wood blocks. I think the author of the book owned the cuts, and that's part of the business of getting the royalties and owning the property of the book later on, the copyright. Gray owns the copyright. So he owned the blocks, and he probably purchased the blocks to the wrong size. It sounds to me as though he mistook the printing area for the page size. And didn't allow for the putting it on the page, on the printing press. Didn't allow for fixing it in the printing press. And I proved this by looking. I'm very, very fortunate. A fantastic portfolio of material survives in the Royal College of Surgeons in London today. The wood engravers donated their own album in the 1920s to the Royal College of Surgeons in London when they went out of business. They were obviously very proud of their own engravings on this book. They knew it was a famous book, and they were proud of their engravings. And they donated their own album in the 1920s when they themselves wound themselves up. So you can see the bottom, August 1923 is when they donated it. I found this in the Royal College of Surgeons in London, and it's the most exquisite scrapbook. Every image has been printed on the thinnest possible paper. It's called India paper, special paper for printers. And this is the first print from the freshly engraved blocks, so they're perfect. And I learned from this book that there's one particular image which didn't appear in the textbook, a large image of the spine. It didn't ever appear, so they took things out. And also, let's have a look. You can see how this hand is my size, it's life size, so you can see how large these things are. They couldn't change the size. It would have taken another year's work to diminish these down. They'd all have to be redrawn and re-engraved again on the wood blocks. But you can see from this textbook that the captions were all hand engraved originally. They don't appear like that in the book, in the first edition. They're typeset in the first edition. They're in hard type, in metal type in the first edition. So these carvings were all wasted. They were cut off, the blocks, to make the blocks smaller. It was a tremendously difficult job done at the printers, tremendously hard, because to cut something off a block risks damaging the image, so it must have been done with expert care, absolutely expert care. And this is a particular page where you can really see it. This is the muscles of the thigh, showing the hip at the top, and you can see the typeset caption there's the running head at the very top, which says gluteal region. Then below that, you can see the caption for the image, and it says muscles of the gluteal and posterior femoral region. You can see it's ranged left, so that the crest of the hip, so that the caption goes to one side of the hip. So they've saved a line of type there, or a line or two. And then at the bottom of the woodcut cuts into the bottom margin of the page. There's very little margin at the bottom there. And you can see that the column of type is only a third of the page. It should be half the page. The image should be half as wide, not 2/3 of the page. And this wasn't realised. Nobody's made any notice of this at all in the first edition. It's amazing. So this goes right the way through the book. So you can see these images are larger than they should be. And it gives the whole book a feeling of generosity, especially by comparison with Quain. This is Quain next to it, and you can see the same structure being illustrated in two different ways. The one, this side is Carter, that side is Quain. And the Quain image doesn't have any captions on the thing itself, it just has A, B, C, and D, or numbers. And then from there you go down to the footnote. You can see there's quite a footnote at the bottom there. So your eye has to go from the little number, I call it proxy labelling. So you have a number and you go down to the footnote the whole time. You have to keep going from the thing to the footnote all the time. And often your eye can slip. You can learn the wrong thing, which is really bad. Whereas when you look at Carter's, the more you look, the more you see. If you look into the folds of that thing, it's got all the carved, and you can see it's all been hand carved. Absolutely beautifully carved. And it's not that big, it's only a woodblock size, but it's larger than Quain and it's far more revealing. There's no footnotes in Gray. They don't work like that. They're basically maps of these structures with the words on the image. And so you learn through your reading brain and through your looking imagery brain, different parts of the brain. You remember the two things together, and that helps you memorize. They're kind of mnemonic images. I think that's what you would call them. And this is the human hand. I said it was my size, compared to Wilson's, which was another textbook of the day. You can see Wilson's is only a woodblock size, and he uses footnotes as well, the proxy labelling and the footnotes as well. Whereas Carter, it's there, all the labels are on there, except that somebody has put first on the first finger. So that should perhaps have been there, I think. but and shaft on the second finger, which is interesting. Those are other things that people have added. And you find this with Gray's anatomy, people put their own annotations. In one, I found a flap over the genitalia. That kind of thing, you know, shy people who didn't want to see it, or a librarian who didn't want the students to examine it, I don't know. But you do find annotations, and you can see how beautiful these drawings are, and how the muscles and names and ligaments, it's just beautifully done. Absolutely, they're wonderful illustrations, anatomically. Anatomy had never been so legible before, never. The reviewers say there's no mistake about the names of these structures. You don't make mistakes with this one, and that's quite clear. What they're saying is the other things. You could many a slip between cup and lip with using those anatomical books. Quain gives you the regions of the abdomen. Gray and Carter give you not just the regions. If you look at the different type on the regions, it gives you the names of the regions, and it gives you what you would palpate if you were palpating the abdomen, what you would find underneath. So there's a huge amount of information. It's a lot of data, but it's all in the right place, and you can learn it. And anatomy had never been so painless or so dignified. The painlessness, I think, happens partly because it's Carter with his view of the body being the image of God, because he wouldn't show the body in pain. But also because anaesthesia had come in 1846, and this is the first student textbook of the whole of human anatomy, which had been composed since then. So anaesthesia is part of the culture of the day at that time. It's a new thing. Also dignified. This is, I think, to show you how dignified the posture, the whole demeanour of the body is shown in this book, is dignified. Even this case where he's showing you on the slab, the head is marked up on a block, on a wooden block, which was normal in those days, and he's showing you how to tear the skin, to get the skin off so you can get your musculature visible. So they're flaying the body here, which is not a pleasant thing, but he's showing it, the body's in repose. It's not showing as though it's meat. It's not showing it as though it's meat. It's a human being who's in repose. All the orifices closed as though it's been nicely laid out, which it has, laid out for burial, which it has. It's Carter's way of laying out the dead. And this is Carter's list of illustrations. Now, when the Grays came out, there were, I'll come to that in a minute, but this is the list of illustrations, and you can see, if you look closely, perhaps you might not be able to read it at the back. On the most of them, he has a second column between the subject and the page, and he's giving credit to other anatomists for the inspiration of details or the actual image itself. So here's Mascagni, Quain, Brechet, Hind. There's Arnold appears quite a lot. These are previous anatomists whose work has helped him produce these images. Okay, this is Carter. And here, under the arteries, there aren't any. There's no acknowledgements to other people. And that's what makes me think these are really original drawings. And also, I think these are what Gray saw and realised he could use them. And the other thing that makes me think that Gray liked these images very much is that I found the proofs of part of the book, the last proofs, the hand-corrected proofs by Gray, hand-corrected by Gray, in the safe in the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh. I was actually looking for the original binding of the first edition, but they told me they had something in the safe. And it wasn't the book, it was these proofs. It's extraordinary, they've survived. I don't know who saved them and why, but I suspect it's because of something I'll show you in a second. Up here it says press in the corner, which means it's ready to go for press, okay? And there's various corrections where he marks in the margin and on the text for things that he wants, letters that are wrong or spellings. But at the very top it says the cuts of the arteries I wish to be good as is possible. And he signs it HG. And when he's asking for a good impression, he's asking for them, please, to pay attention for the next section of the book, which was the arteries. This is just the previous one, the previous section in the book. Please to print them well. He's asking the printers to pay attention. And he knew how good those images were. He knew. Now this is the title page, which is also in that cache of proofs that are in the Royal College in Edinburgh, in the safe. And you can see it's different from the title page I showed you earlier. This is the proof version with his corrections before it went to press. What we saw was what actually went to press. It's something different. And it's important that it's different. Here it is, Anatomy Descriptive and Surgical by Henry Gray, the drawings by H.V. Carter, and you can see there's quite a bit of changes around Carter's name. At the top it says, in someone else's handwriting, and he's cut it out, it says something like, this is the form of design of title page the publisher approves. So it's the publisher's normal design of title page. And he's put at the top, please send a revise before finally printing it off. So it's not to go to press, they have to do it and show him it before it goes. Okay? And then you come down to this bit with what's happened around Carter. And you can see he's put 2 lines through Carter's name. Can you see that at the back? Yes. He's put 2 lines through Carter's name, H.V. Carter MD, 2 lines, and it says, type size of the name below. Okay? So he mustn't be the same type size as Gray. He's cutting him down to size, okay? And it says, there's this big thick line here, great thick line. You can see he's pressed really hard with his nib and his old dip-in ink pen. To be omitted, HG. Now what does that say? I'll just show you. Can you read that at the back? Professor of Anatomy, Government College, Bombay. Okay, that's to be omitted. You cut it out. You can't have a professor doing the images in a book, can you? When there's a lecturer who's the author. Okay? That's it. That's what he said. Omitted. Now, I had an inkling of this, but I had no proof of this man's character. I had absolutely no proof. It was just a feeling. And this was what really showed me what Gray was like. And I think that's deeply me. Deeply me. When he knew how much hard work Carter had put into those images and how perfect those images are, how beautiful they are. And he wasn't getting any royalty forever, whereas Gray was getting all the money from the book. It's really not right what happened here. This is an injustice. And I showed you the title page earlier on. You can see the printers thought it was an injustice, and so did the publishers. They changed it. They did make him diminutive, and they did take out his professorship. But they kept his name quite large, and they put their own insignia in there. They moved everything up, and they changed it all so that Gray could not just say Carter was unimportant to this book. They did it, they were much kinder than Gray was. Now this is an image, this is what gave me the idea, was that this is what was going on. This is an image from the Spleen book, which Gray gave no credit to Carter, but it also appears in Gray's Anatomy. So, I know that Carter produced all the images for Gray's Anatomy, and Carter gives credit to everyone else who helped him produce images. They didn't actually physically help him, he conferred with their work. This one he gives no credit to anyone else. It's his own. It's clearly his own. It's beautiful. A, it's microscopic, and B, it's perfect. So I know it's by Carter. I know it's a piece of Carter's work, but it appears in the Spleen with no credit to Carter. And he'd done this, Gray had done this before. Whereas other people Carter had worked for, he'd actually got credit for his images. And another case, something Carter had done for Gray, I wasn't sure who the author was until we come to Gray's. It had appeared in someone else's textbook, courtesy, after Henry Gray. And Gray hadn't corrected it. It was actually an image by Carter, but it was in something by Gray, who hadn't credited Carter. So the other author thought it was by Gray, and he accepted that misapprehension. So it's this kind of thing. You can see why Carter was, not happy about joining in this project at first. Okay, here's the Great Exhibition being dismantled in Hyde Park. It was moved to South London to Sydenham and re-erected, and it stayed there till the 1920s, I think, when it was burnt down. Unfortunately, the floors burnt, the wooden floors. So the whole thing went. My parents remember it. Here's the dissecting room. I want to talk just very quickly about the modernity of those images. This is from this is technical drawing from the Great Exhibition catalogue, and you can see it's just done in lines, and that's exactly the way it's kind of very plain way of drawing. It's a technical drawings, and I think that's what Carter is using. It's kind of technical drawing of the body. They're not illustrations. They're drawings, technical drawings of the body. And you can see also these wonderful views of London from the air. This is an unaccustomed view from the north, looking south. Kind of anatomy of London. These are all from the same decade. Geology of London, looking at the substructure of London. Contour lines are new in the 1850s. They didn't have contour lines before that on maps. They're absolutely new, very hot technology. And this is a skeleton map done in 49 to 50, so just before the Great Exhibition, by the Ordnance Survey. And it's actually called a skeleton map. It's simply an outline of the streets of London with all the names on. So I'm talking about mapping the body. That's what I think Carter's doing. And this is a map which shows, like that view I showed you of the abdomen, where he shows all the different levels in different typography. This is being done on mapping at the time too. You can see this map's got colour, but it's also got large letters on regions like the Roman numerals, but it's also got boundaries, it's got all the street names, and it's got other details in other typography. So what I'm showing you about Carter's images, I want you to remember, this is the 1850s, it's old-fashioned to us, but it was modern then, it's clear and clean and modern. And the book was too, because it had no footnotes and no margin notes. It was just clear pages with a good contents list, a good illustrations list, and a brilliant index. So it's a really clever textbook, it's a good book. And also, at the time, there was also this wonderful use of letters. There's a lovely book by a man called Gerard Curtis called Visual Words, about the playful way people were using typography at this time. This is from a children's alphabet book where the letter S is actually hung up on telegraph wires, and of course telegraph is very new at that time. And so are the railways, they're new builds, this is really new. So the letter S is a station with bustle and din. Gorgeous. Bribery on the dunce's cap. And this is Mr. Punch carrying the title for the index. They're wood blocks on a sort of barrow. And these are caricatures. The middle one is actually an advert. The gorgeous patent self-adjusting shirt. And these are cartoons in Punch, showing a man in ready-bought clothes, not tailor-made, but off the peg. And they've still got the prices on. Okay, it's taking a mickey out of men who buy their clothes off the peg. Nouveau riche. And also the illustrated London shirt, which has things that you wouldn't want to know about under the armpits and things like that. It's a caricature. But the use of the writing on the things themselves is very like Gray's Anatomy, and these are all of the same period, these caricatures. Okay, just to tell you how beautiful these are, to remember the dignity, and to show you what they were moving on from, what Carter would not do. This is an image from Crane of a woman's womb, her fallopian tubes, her ovaries, and her vagina slit open and nailed on a board. And you can see from the shadows on it, it's been held up to catch the light. Okay? Now when I first saw this image, I winced. It's a woodblock size image. I absolutely winced, and I wondered at myself why I winced. And it took me a while to realise that it's actually a crucifixion. This image, it's a crucifixion. And why I value Carter as much as anything is because he wouldn't do that. What he's done is a diagram. He didn't want to have to show that a woman died in order for us to have some knowledge. He respected his mother and his sister, and he did not want to show a woman's secret and vacant parts as though they were meat. He wanted to show it as a dignified part, something that God had made for the creation of the human race. And that's what he shows. And if you remember the kinds of diagrams you've seen in modern textbooks, there's no whole meat. They don't show meat anymore. This has been a very influential diagram. Very important. And you can see also he shows you different things on each half of the image. So this is one image, but it shows you more than one thing. And that's the same with the brain outside at the bottom of the stairs. It's not an asymmetrical brain, it's two layers. He's showing you the brainstem on one side and not on the other. But this is the way he used diagrams to contain a lot of information. So it's a document of the 1850s. It's the epitome of modernity at the time. It had manageability, navigability, portability, because you could carry it. If you were a young man with big pockets, you could fit that in your pocket, whereas you couldn't carry 3 volumes of Quain. And Quain cross-references between volumes. It drives you nuts. So it had portability, it had affordability, it was cheaper than Quain. It had interdisciplinarity in the mapping and the other things, the respect for the body. Generosity, capacity, it had everything you want. Structural clarity. And one thing I haven't mentioned is that it's anatomy descriptive and surgical. The whole point of this book was to say to you, not just you've got to learn this, but to say you've got to learn this because when you're a surgeon, you need to know this, this, and this. So it was treating the student as an adult. It was saying this is the surgical knowledge you need in order to become a surgeon. This is the knowledge of anatomy you really need. And so it was an essential book. It didn't treat them like babies learning stuff off by rote. So it's structural clarity, the transparency of its mapping and labelling, the decency and humanity that is embedded in that book, and the dignity of the subject, meaning of the corpse, of the anatomical subject, but also of the subject, the discipline of anatomy. So it's a really brilliant book. And I've just got a small poem here, which is by Coventry Patmore, who's a Victorian poet. This is To the Body. I hope you get this. I'll read it slowly. He's addressing the body. Little sequestered pleasure house for God and for his spouse. The spouse is the Holy Spirit, that's the soul inside the body. For God and for his spouse. Elaborately, yea past conceiving, fair, since from the grace decorum of the hair, even to the tingling sweet souls of the simple earth-confiding feet. And from the inmost heart, outward unto the thin silk curtains of the skin, every least part astonished hears, and sweet replies to some light portion of the spheres. I just think it's the most beautiful poem, and it belongs somehow with this book for me. These two things belong together. It's like a prayer to the body, really. Carter's imagery. Now, what I didn't tell you was that when the book came out, there was a really savage review, which accused Gray of plagiarism from Quain, both in the structure and the text, and they had parallel texts showing that there were so many likenesses between Gray's texts and Quain's texts. And he didn't credit Quain. There was no genuflection within the book to thank Quain. So he had a really vicious review, and it must have been very destructive. He did put some credit in, very reluctantly, in the second edition. but you can see the personality type. It wasn't just Carter, he didn't give credit to. So thank you all for listening. Thank you. We could go straight on to the next slide. Do you want a break? Or should we go straight on? Let's have a vote. Break? Straight on. Straight on. Who wants straight on? And who wants a break? You deserve a break. I think you deserve a break. I'll have a drink of water. We'll start again in 5 minutes, okay? Is that all right? 5 minutes? Oh, there's lunch. And I go on after lunch. Okay.
So we'll break for lunch and then we'll reassemble. There will be interactions about this lecture as well as the next at the end of the next lecture. And correlating it with this city where Dr. Carter worked, and that is the most important part of it. So I invite you all to lunch. And the faculty and they are requested to join in the boardroom. Faculty in the boardroom.
Please do come back because I'm talking about Indian diseases afterwards. Okay.